Hi, my name is Ray, and welcome back to another episode of Ray's Economics Cluebook. Today, we're going to go over inflation and talk about an overview of it and beginning our first chapter on it. So, inflation and unemployment are known as the twin evils of an economy, especially the U.S. economy. And typically, the Federal Reserve's goals are to limit and keep unemployment at its natural rate, and also to limit inflation to around 2%. That is its inflation goal or target. And so when it comes to inflation, there are two main fundamental ways to measure inflation. One is from a consumer standpoint, the Consumer Price Index. So the Consumer Price Index is recorded by the Bureau of Labor Statistics early every month based off of the previous month's statistics. And since it's a consumer standpoint, it's based off of a survey to households. And it basically looks at a consumer basket of goods and services that includes imported products such as Heineken beer. These imported products, of course, are a very fundamental and large part of our consumer basket. So of course, CPI also can overstate true inflation because it does not account for quality increases. So for instance, the quality of a good may increase, which will subsequently likely increase the price of the good. And the CPI usually just looks at this price increase at face value. It does not account for any underneath quality changes, so it can overstate inflation. And along with CPI, there are two very volatile sectors. There's the energy sector and the food sector. So energy such as gas prices, and of course food prices can also be all over the place. And so since these two are outliers, the core CPI takes out these two sectors from its consumer basket and looks at a more stable consumer basket and a more realistic measure of inflation perhaps. So of course on the other side of the spectrum there is, from the producers or the producer's point of view, the personal consumption expenditure, or the PCE, which we have also talked about in a previous video. This is measured by the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which also measures GDP every year, every quarter, and in the Commerce Department. And so the BEA basically has a survey to businesses instead of households, and it includes a chain link methodology. What this means is that it includes a methodology which accounts for changes within the consumer basket for cheaper options. Because obviously, for instance, if the price of Colgate increases, then a substitute for Colgate, which would be Crest toothpaste, would be more popular because it's cheaper at this point compared to Colgate. So the PCE does account for substitutions in the basket. So that's the chain link methodology. And so as a result of these substitutions for lower priced goods and services, the PCE is lower than the CPI, but it moves in tandem with it. So it is basically directly proportional with the CPI. And just like the CPI, there's a core PCE that takes out the volatile food and energy sectors to provide a more stable and maybe a more realistic view of inflation within the economy. So building upon that, let's look at the real-life history of the PCE and the CPI in recent years. So as you can see here, this is the PCE, this is the CPI, and in yellow is the core PCE and the core CPI. So you can see here, the core PCE and core CPI is a lot flatter and more stable than the blue dots. The blue dots represent the headline, or the regular PCE or CPI, that includes the volatile food and energy sectors. And so, as you can see here, we also drew a 2% target since the Fed explicitly states that its 2% inflation target is measured according to the core PCE. And so we see here the core PCE has the Fed maintained a 2% target for the core PCE rates in this graph. So you might be wondering, why does high inflation matter? Well, inflation itself, when moderate, is okay for an economy. In fact, it's healthy for an economy. However, the problem arises when there is high, rapid inflation that creates price instability and rapid increases in price. And so that creates, for this video, we'll talk about the fundamental explicit costs with inflation and high inflation. So one explicit cost of high inflation is the shoe leather cost. The shoe leather cost basically represents costs of shoes, to remember it that way. Because why do you need shoes? You need shoes to run to the bank. So shoe leather cost basically measures the costs of bank transactions. And bank transactions, the more bank transactions you have, can signal that people are changing out their currency because of high inflation, changing the currency's value constantly. And so that creates a lot of extra bank extra and inefficient bank costs and bank transactions that otherwise would not have been needed. The second cost is the menu cost. It's pretty self-explanatory. Menus basically list prices. So as prices increase so much, the listings for these prices within different stores or menus have to be constantly changed and constantly revised and repaired. And this, of course, costs money based off the materials used to show prices. So that's a menu cost. And so rapid inflation creates a need for rapid changes in menus, which creates costs. And finally is the unit of account cost. Unit of account, basically our dollar, the US dollar, for instance, is a unit of account. It is a way of storing value. So as the unit of account of the US dollar becomes more unstable and unreliable of high inflation, people will have inefficiencies when dealing with transactions involving this unstable dollar. For instance, we have more conversion costs because people will be less willing to use the US dollar and, for instance, more willing to use other currencies or commodities such as gold. So as you convert US dollar to gold, that creates a lot of unnecessary transactions and unnecessary costs that are only occurring under high inflation and unstable dollar. So those are the three main explicit costs of high inflation, and in the future we'll talk about the more real costs of high inflation. So for our final clues, we need to remember that inflation, moderate inflation, and consistent, stable inflation is healthy for an economy, but high inflation creates, in this I will talk about today, a great misallocation of resources and a lot of unnecessary new costs that arise. And as a result, the Fed targets a 2% inflation rate that measured by the core PCE. It is measured by the core PCE. So thank you, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.